Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I used to think Kelly's sharp words were just jokes, that the little digs, the dismissive eye rolls, the way she brushed me off in front of others were just part of her personality. I told myself she didn't mean it, that she was just teasing, that I was being too sensitive. But now, sitting at this table, surrounded by family, I realized something. She meant every word. Kelly laughed, swirling the wine in her glass, flashing a perfect smile at her sister. "You know Jake," she said, nudging my arm. "Always playing it safe." I forced a chuckle, gripping my fork. Not sure what that means. She gave me a look, the one that said I was supposed to go along with whatever story she was spinning. "Come on, babe." Like when we talked about expanding the restaurant, and you got all nervous about the risk. I kept my face neutral, but my jaw tensed. That was a lie. We had discussed expansion. I had done the research, checked the numbers, explained why it wasn't the right time. But Kelly had a way of twisting things, of making me look small. Her sister smiled knowingly. Kelly's always been the bold one. Kelly shrugged, laughing. "Exactly. He plays it safe. I take the risks." I exhaled slowly, setting my fork down. I wasn't safe. I was careful. There was a difference. Kelly wasn't done. Like when we went skydiving, remember? I glanced up, already knowing where this was going. "Oh, this is a great story," Kelly said, turning to the others. "So, Jake and I went skydiving for our anniversary a few years back. Well, I went skydiving. Jake here barely got out of the plane." Laughter rippled around the table. My stomach tightened. That wasn't what happened. I had jumped. I had been hesitant, sure, but I had done it. But now the story belonged to Kelly. I should have corrected her. I should have said something. Instead, I let the lie hang there. Her father chuckled. "You let her show you up like that, son?" Before I could speak, Kelly smirked. "Oh, you have no idea. He's always like that. If it weren't for me, he'd still be playing it safe in some tiny diner instead of owning his own restaurant." I clenched my jaw. My restaurant. My work. I had built that place from the ground up. But in her version of the story, I had done nothing without her. Something inside me snapped. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You're right, Kelly," I said, setting the glass down. "I'm cautious. I think things through, which is why I was smart enough to know that buying a restaurant was a good investment, and also smart enough to know that expansion isn't the right move yet, even though you keep pushing like we have unlimited money." Kelly's smile froze. The table went quiet. Her sister raised an eyebrow. "Wait, you to go skydiving?" I nodded. "Sure did. I was nervous, yeah, but I jumped." I glanced at Kelly. Guess she forgot that part. Kelly's grip tightened on her wine glass. "It's just a story, Jake." I leaned back. "Yeah, one where I'm always the joke." No one said anything. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Kelly forced a smile, but the shine in her eyes had dimmed. For the first time, I saw something other than confidence on her face. I saw uncertainty, and that's when I realized she wasn't used to being challenged. She had spent years making me smaller, controlling the narrative, making herself look stronger by making me look weaker. And I had let her. Not anymore. I picked up my fork and took a bite of my food, acting like nothing had happened. The tension in the air belonged to her now. I wasn't going to sit there and let her rewrite my life. And the next time she tried, I'd be ready. Kelly didn't like being challenged. That much became clear the moment we got home from dinner at her sister's house. She barely spoke on the drive, her fingers tapping against her knee, her lips pressed into a thin line. Normally, she'd be chatty, rehashing the night, talking about what her family said. But tonight, she sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her energy simmering like a pot ready to boil over. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and unbuckled my seatbelt. Kelly didn't move. Her voice was sharp when she finally spoke. "What the hell was that?" I glanced at her. What was what? She turned to face me, her eyes narrowed. "At dinner, you made me look like an idiot." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "I made you look like an idiot?" "Kelly, I was just correcting a few things. Telling the truth." Her jaw clenched. "You embarrass me." "No, I stopped letting you embarrass me." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "You've been doing it for years, Kelly. Twisting stories, making me look weak in front of people, acting like I wouldn't have anything if it weren't for you. She scoffed, shaking her head. That's not true. It is. I exhaled, gripping the wheel. And you know it. Kelly huffed, pushing the door open. I'm not having this conversation right now. She slammed the car door behind her and marched inside. I sat there for a few moments, staring at the empty passenger seat, feeling something settle in my chest. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one left feeling small. I thought maybe, just maybe, things would change after that night. That Kelly would pull back on the jabs. That she'd rethink the way she spoke to me in public. That she'd take a second before cutting me down in front of our friends. But instead, she doubled down. The next week, we went out to dinner with some friends, people we had known for years. It was a nice restaurant, the kind where you had to book a table weeks in advance. The conversation was easy at first. People swapping stories, catching up, laughing. And then, somehow, the topic turned to careers. One of the guys, Ryan, turned to me. Jake, how's the restaurant going? I heard business is booming. I nodded. Yeah, we've been doing really well. Thinking about adding some seasonal menu items this fall. Ryan grinned. Man, that's awesome. You built that place from the ground up. Before I could respond, Kelly let out a small, amused sound. Well, we built it, didn't we, babe? I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Kelly smirked, taking a sip of her wine. I was the one who convinced him to go for it. The table got quiet. I set my fork down slowly. Kelly. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. What? I met her eyes. What exactly did you do to build the restaurant? A flicker of something crossed her face. Hesitation, maybe, but it was gone in an instant. I encouraged you. I pushed you when you were too scared to take the risk. Ryan raised an eyebrow. His wife shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. I let out a breath, leaning forward. You pushed me? Kelly, I spent years saving up. I worked nonstop to make that place happen. I took the loans, I managed the business, I spent every waking hour making sure it survived. What exactly did you do? Because last time I checked, you weren't there scrubbing dishes at 1 in the morning. Kelly's expression hardened. Oh, come on, Jake, don't be so dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. My voice was cool, controlled. I'm done letting you take credit for my work. Silence stretched across the table. Kelly shifted in her chair, her confidence wavering for the first time. Her face was flushed, her jaw tight. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to me fighting back. Ryan cleared his throat. So, about that fall menu, but the mood had already shifted. Kelly was stiff for the rest of the night. She barely spoke, barely touched her food. When we got home, she stormed inside, muttering something under her breath. I didn't follow her. I didn't apologize. Because for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't going to let her rewrite my life. And if she thought she could keep getting away with it, she was wrong. The shift between us was undeniable. Kelly wasn't laughing as much anymore. At least, not when I was around. She wasn't throwing out little jabs in public, wasn't telling her twisted versions of our life to entertain a crowd. But it wasn't because she had changed. It was because she had realized I wasn't going to let her. Instead, she did something worse. She withdrew. The space between us stretched wider every day. At first, it was subtle. Late-night showers that lasted too long. Mornings where she barely acknowledged me before leaving the house. Unlocked screens on her phone that suddenly became password protected. I wasn't stupid. Something was wrong. And one afternoon, I found proof. I had come home early from the restaurant, hoping to get some paperwork done before dinner. Kelly wasn't home. Probably at the farmer's market again. Lately, she had been obsessed with it, raving about fresh produce, supporting local vendors, insisting it was worth every penny, even though she came home with next to nothing. At first, I had ignored it, but as I was setting my keys down on the counter, my eyes landed on a small wooden box peeking out from the back of a drawer she had left open. Something about it made me stop. I walked over, pulled it out, and lifted the lid. Inside was a watch. A sleek, high-end men's watch. Definitely not mine. A sharp chill ran down my spine. Next to it was a handwritten note. Looking forward to next time. I stared at it for a long moment, my pulse steady, my breathing slow. My fingers tightened around the paper. Who the hell was D? My mind ran through the possibilities, but deep down I already knew. This wasn't just an expensive gift. It wasn't a thank you card. It was a sign of something bigger. something I hadn't been ready to face. I put everything back the way I found it, closed a drawer, and stepped back. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't shaking, because anger hadn't hit me yet. Only realization. I had spent years letting Kelly chip away at me, making myself smaller, convincing myself that this was just how she was. But now I understood. The way she mocked me in public, the way she constantly made me feel like I wasn't enough, the way she had started pulling away the moment I pushed back, it wasn't just because she wanted control. It was because she needed to justify what she was doing behind my back. I exhaled, steady and slow. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to accuse her. Not yet, because I needed proof. I needed to catch her. And when I did, she wouldn't just lose my trust. She'd lose everything. I spent the next few days watching, not confronting, not accusing, just observing. Because now I knew something was happening. I just needed to catch it. Kelly didn't notice the shift. Maybe she was too wrapped up in her own secret, too confident in the image she had built. She still came home late from the farmer's market, still acted like everything was normal, still told me she was supporting small businesses when all she had in her hands was a tiny bag of produce that wasn't worth the $100 she was spending. She thought she was untouchable. She thought I was still blind. I wasn't, and I was about to prove it. The first thing I did was switch the watch. That expensive gift she had hidden, the one she had tucked away like a guilty secret, I took it, not to keep, just to replace. I drove down to a pawn shop across town, found the cheapest, ugliest knockoff I could get my hands on, and swapped them out. Now, when she gave it to him, he knows she was playing games too. The second thing I did was track her. Kelly had a habit of leaving her phone out when she got home, tossing it on the counter, too comfortable in the idea that I'd never go through it. So, when she left for the shower, I picked it up. I wasn't looking for messages or calls. She was smarter than that. But she wasn't smart enough to avoid one thing: GPS tracking. I installed an app that linked her phone's location to mine. Silent. Hidden. Something she'd never notice. Now, wherever she went, I'd know. And on Saturday, I finally got my answer. She left the house in the morning, just like always, grabbing her keys and purse. Heading to the market, she called over her shoulder. "Might check out a new vendor today." I kept my face neutral. "Have fun." She flashed a quick smile and walked out the door. I waited 5 minutes. Then I grabbed my own keys, checked my phone, and followed the blinking dot on the screen. It led me straight to the farmer's market. The place was busy, vendors calling out specials, people wandering between stalls, families enjoying the warm weekend air. And Kelly? She was right where I expected her to be, standing in front of a stall run by a man. Tall, rough hands, an easy smile. Too easy. The kind of smile that wasn't meant for just any customer. He leaned in slightly as she spoke, his posture relaxed, familiar. She handed him a stack of cash, way too much for the tiny bag of vegetables he passed back. Then, after a quick glance around, she stepped past the stall and into a small storage shed behind it. He followed. The door shut, and my stomach went cold. I didn't need to see what happened next. I already knew. I exhaled through my nose, forcing myself to stay calm, to keep my body relaxed, my face unreadable, because now I had all the proof I needed, and it was time to end this game. I stood there, watching the shed door shut, and for a moment, everything around me faded. The hum of the farmer's market, the laughter of families, the casual chatter between customers and vendors, all of it became background noise to the one undeniable fact in front of me. Kelly had walked into that shed with him, and I knew exactly what that meant. I could feel my heartbeat, slow and steady, like my body had already accepted the truth before my mind had fully processed it. But instead of marching over and throwing the door open, instead of making a scene like some enraged fool, I turned and walked away. Not because I was weak, because I was calculating. I had spent too much time being made to feel small. Too much time letting Kelly control the narrative. If I was going to take her down, I was going to do it my way. The moment I got back to my car, I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app. The blinking dot, Kelly's location, was still inside that shed. I checked the time. 20 minutes. I let out a slow breath, locking my jaw. She had been lying to me for months. And now, it was time for her lies to end. I drove back home, my mind working through the details of what I had just witnessed. I could have confronted her right then and there. Could have thrown open the door and let the whole market see what she was really doing in that shed. But that wouldn't have been enough. I needed everyone to see the truth. So I started planning. The next morning, I made some calls, arranged a bulk order with a contact I had at the food bank. Then I made another call to the owner of the farmer's market. By noon, I had everything set in motion. Kelly had no idea what was coming. When she came home later that day, she was glowing. That same satisfied, self-sure expression she always had after her little farmer's market trips. She tossed her bag onto the counter, flashed me a smile. "Got some great stuff today," she said, pulling out a small bag of vegetables. "There's this new vendor, super fresh produce. You'd love it." I stared at the bag. 3 bell peppers. A handful of green beans. That's what hundreds of dollars a week was getting her. I forced a smile. "Sound great." She didn't notice the edge in my voice. Didn't notice anything. Because she thought she was untouchable. The next Saturday, I got up early. Kelly was already getting ready to head to the market, going through her usual routine, taking just a little too long to pick an outfit for someone who was supposedly just buying vegetables. I played along, let her think everything was normal. Then, once she left, I followed. Not like last time, hiding in the crowd. This time, I walked straight through the market, right up to her lover's stall. And this time, I wasn't alone. Behind me were 3 employees from the food bank, the owner of the farmer's market, and half a dozen people from the surrounding stalls, all watching. Kelly wasn't there yet, but he was. The moment he saw me, his expression shifted. A flicker of recognition, a twitch of discomfort. "Morning," I said, voice steady. "You got my order ready?" He hesitated. "Order?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the confirmation email I had forged, one that listed a bulk purchase of every single piece of produce he had in stock. "I'm buying everything," I said. "Right now." His jaw tightened. "I can't." "You can. And you will." I gestured to the market owner, standing behind me. "We've already arranged payment. You're about to have your biggest sale of the year." He looked between me and the growing crowd of watching eyes. He had no choice. 10 minutes later, every crate of vegetables, every basket of fruit, every single item from his stall was packed into trucks for the food bank. And just as the last box was being loaded, Kelly arrived. She froze mid-step, eyes flicking between me, the empty stall, and the man standing in front of it. Her lover, who was now staring at the remains of his business like he had just been hit by a truck. "Jake," she said slowly, her voice uncertain. "What's going on?" I turned to her, smiled. "Just supporting local businesses," I said. "Isn't that what you always say?" A murmur went through the watching crowd. Kelly's face drained of color. "You see," I continued, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. "I wanted to make sure I was doing my part. So I bought everything your favorite vendor had. Figure we could put it to better use feeding people who actually need it." Her eyes widened. "Jake, and you know what's funny?" I cut her off, tilting my head. "I've been coming to this market for years. Never once saw you here before a few months ago. Guess I just wasn't paying attention." Kelly opened her mouth, then closed it. Because she knew. She knew everyone was listening. I turned back to her lover, who looked like he was about to be sick. "By the way," I said, "she got you a gift." I pulled out the cheap, fake watch I had swapped and tossed it onto the stall counter. His face dropped. Kelly's breathing was shaky. "Jake, please." But before she could finish, another voice cut through the air. "What the hell is this?" I turned. A woman stood near the edge of the crowd, fury written across her face. His wife. I hadn't even needed to tell her. She had figured it out herself. The market went dead silent. Kelly ran. She didn't even try to defend herself. She just turned and bolted, shoving past people, disappearing into the parking lot. Her lover wasn't far behind. But his wife? She stayed. And by the time I walked away, I knew I had done exactly what I came here to do. Kelly had spent months making a fool out of me. But in the end, she had humiliated herself. Kelly didn't come home that night. Not that I expected her to. After what happened to the farmer's market, there wasn't much left for her to cling to. She had spent months making me look like a fool, convincing herself she was in control, that she was too smart to get caught. But in the end, she had been exposed in front of everyone. And now, she was running. I sat in our quiet house, the one she had once filled with lies, and let the silence settle in. I should have felt relief, satisfaction, something. Instead, I felt nothing. Because Kelly wasn't worth my emotions anymore. My phone buzzed on the table. For a second, I thought it might be her. But when I checked the screen, I saw another name. Ryan. Man, I don't even know what to say. That was insane. Ryan. She actually ran. Just took off like a damn cartoon character. Ryan, you good? I stared at the messages for a second before responding. Me, yeah. I'm good. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. Kelly finally crawled back home the next morning. I was already up, drinking my coffee at the kitchen table when I heard her keys jingle at the door. She stepped inside, looking like hell. Messy hair, dark circles under her eyes, last night's makeup smudged. Her clothes were wrinkled, like she had slept in them. She shut the door quietly and turned to face me. I took a slow sip of my coffee. You're up early. She swallowed. Jake, can we talk? I gestured to the chair across from me. Go ahead. She hesitated, then sat down. For a moment, she just stared at her hands, rubbing them together like she was working up the nerve to say something. I messed up, she said finally, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. I didn't respond. She let out a shaky breath. I wasn't thinking. I was selfish. She bit her lip, forcing tears into her voice. I don't know why I did it. I tilted my head. Really? Because you seemed pretty confident about it when you were sneaking into that shed. She flinched, but I didn't let up. You knew exactly what you were doing, Kelly, I continued. And don't act like it was just some mistake. Mistakes are accidents. This was a choice. Over and over again. Tears welled in her eyes, but I just stared at her. I knew those tears. They weren't for me. They were for herself. She reached for my hand across the table. Jake, I love you. I pulled away. No, you don't. She sucked in a breath like I had slapped her. I do. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. I leaned forward, my voice calm. You humiliated me for years, Kelly. Made me feel like I wasn't enough. And the whole time, it was because you were the one sneaking around. You tore me down to make yourself feel better about what you were doing. She shook her head quickly. No, it wasn't like that. I just what? I cut in. Got bored? Needed something exciting? Decided that lying to your husband every single week was more fun than just being honest? She sniffled, swiping at her eyes. I don't want to lose you. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You lost me the moment you walked into that shed. Silence. Then she dropped the act. Her expression shifted, the fake sorrow twisting into defensiveness. So that's it? She snapped. You're just going to throw everything away? I set my coffee down. You already did. She scoffed, crossing her arms. It was just a fling, Jake. You're seriously ending our marriage over this? I stared at her, amazed at how quickly she had turned this around. I'm ending it, I said slowly, because I deserve better than this. I deserve better than you. Her mouth opened, then closed. She knew. She knew she had lost. I stood up, grabbing my keys from the counter. I'll be staying somewhere else while we figure out the divorce. Take whatever time you need to pack your stuff, but don't expect to stay here for long. Her eyes widened. You're kicking me out? I nodded. I own this house, Kelly. You were just living in it. Her face twisted with anger, but I didn't stick around to hear whatever excuse or insult she had next. I walked out the door without looking back. I wasn't leaving my home. I was leaving her, and I had never felt lighter in my life. The divorce papers were filed the next morning. I didn't give Kelly time to manipulate, beg, or scheme her way into delaying it. I had spent years letting her push me around, second-guessing myself, feeling like I had to prove my worth to a woman who never deserved me in the first place. Not anymore. The moment I walked into my lawyer's office, everything became real. You sure about this? He asked, scanning the documents before sliding them across the desk toward me. I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. He nodded, adjusting his glasses. From what you've told me, we have everything we need to make this process smooth. You own the house outright. The restaurant is under your name, and you have clear proof of infidelity. He smirked. She's not walking away with a dime. I signed the last page. Good. 2 hours later, the papers were officially in motion. Kelly didn't take it well. I had expected anger, had expected tears, screaming, maybe even a dramatic breakdown. But when she was served the documents 2 days later, she didn't lash out. She tried something worse. She played the victim. I was sitting in my restaurant after closing, reviewing inventory orders, when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. The moment I did, I regretted it. Jake. Kelly's voice was soft, hesitant, broken. I sighed, rubbing my temple. How'd you get this number? She let out a breath. Does it matter? I didn't answer. Jake, I don't understand why you're doing this, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We have years together. I made a mistake, but I cut her off. You made a choice. Repeatedly. Don't act like this was some accident, Kelly. You lied to me for months. Do you even feel bad about it? Or do you just feel bad you got caught? Silence. Then, quietly, I love you. I almost laughed. No, you don't. I do, she insisted. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. So what? You suddenly want to fight for our marriage now that it's inconvenient for you to lose it? Her breath hitched. Jake, please. You humiliated me in front of everyone, I said, my voice cold. Now you get to know how that feels. A sharp inhale. Then the mask slipped, and there she was. The restaurant was our dream. She snapped, her voice shaking with fury. You wouldn't have had the courage to go after it if it weren't for me. There it was. The real Kelly. The woman who never gave me an ounce of credit. The woman who needed to tear me down to make herself feel powerful. I smirked. Then it's funny how my name's the only one on the ownership papers. She lost it, screaming about how I was ruining her life, how I was being cruel, how I was throwing away everything we built. But I just listened, because for the first time, her words meant nothing to me. When she finally ran out of breath, I spoke calmly. You should find somewhere to stay. Because once this divorce goes through, the house is mine. Just like everything else. Then I hung up. The next few weeks were brutal. Kelly tried everything. She cried to her friends, painting me as the bad guy. Jake just threw me away like I meant nothing. She tried guilt. I have nowhere to go. He's taking everything from me. She tried to fight. She showed up at the divorce proceedings with a new lawyer, claiming she was entitled to half of the restaurant. Her argument? She had supported me emotionally while I built it. Her lawyer barely had time to get through his opening statement before mine calmly slid the proof across the table. Security footage, receipts, text logs, and the financial records proving she had contributed nothing. The judge took one look at the evidence and dismissed every single one of her claims. Kelly stared at me in disbelief, like she was only just realizing how this would end. She was walking away with nothing. And the best part? She had no one to blame but herself. The day the divorce was finalized, I stood outside the courthouse, breathing in the crisp air. Ryan was waiting for me at the curb, leaning against his truck. Well, I grinned. It's done. He clapped me on the shoulder. How's it feel? I thought about it for a second. The years of gaslighting. The constant digs at my confidence. The humiliation. The nights I'd spent wondering if I was the problem. Then I exhaled. Feels like I just got my life back. Ryan smirked. About time. And as we drove off, heading toward a new chapter, I realized something. The divorce was over. Kelly was officially out of my life. No more lies. No more manipulation. No more walking on eggshells, waiting for the next insult disguised as a joke. It was done. I had the house, the restaurant, and my freedom. But the funny thing about freedom, it doesn't hit all at once. It comes in moments. The first time I woke up in an empty house and realized I didn't have to brace myself for a passive-aggressive comment. The first time I cooked a meal without hearing Kelly scoff that I should leave it to the professionals, even though I owned a damn restaurant. The first time I sat down after work and felt peace instead of stress. Those were the moments that reminded me I had made the right choice. But the biggest one? The day I saw Kelly again. It happened at the worst possible place, the farmer's market. I hadn't been back since the day I exposed her affair. I didn't have a reason to go. But one of my restaurant suppliers had mentioned a new vendor, and I figured it was worth checking out. I wasn't expecting to see her, but there she was, standing by a stall, pretending like she belonged. She looked different, not in a good way. Her usual confidence was gone. She wasn't standing tall, wasn't laughing too loud like she used to. She looked nervous, like she was waiting for people to stare, whisper, remember. And they did. A few people glanced her way, their expressions unreadable. Others ignored her entirely. But the worst? The vendors. Some of them barely acknowledged her, acting like she wasn't even there. Others whispered to each other as she passed. One woman outright rolled her eyes and turned her back, because here, she wasn't welcome. She had built a reputation as the support local businesses woman, acting like she cared about the market and the vendors. But now, everyone knew the truth. She hadn't been coming here to support anyone. She had been coming here to cheat. And now that the truth was out, nobody wanted anything to do with her. She turned her head slightly, and her eyes locked onto mine. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she panicked. She turned quickly, heading in the opposite direction, but it was too late. I had seen her, and I wasn't the one running. That moment stuck with me longer than I expected. Not because of any lingering anger or resentment. That was gone. It stuck with me because, for the first time, I saw Kelly for who she really was. Not some powerful, untouchable force. Not the woman who used to control every room she walked into. Not the person I had spent years trying to please. She was just lost. She had built her life on lies and manipulation. And now, she had nothing left. I, on the other hand, had everything. I focused on a restaurant. Business was thriving, and without Kelly constantly pushing me to take stupid risks, I was finally making decisions that made sense. I hired a few new chefs, expanded our seasonal menu, and watched my dream grow on my own terms. I took time for myself. I started going to the gym again, picking up old hobbies, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in years because I'd been too wrapped up in trying to fix my marriage. And one evening, as I sat on my back porch, sipping a beer and watching the sunset, I realized something. For the first time in years, I was happy. Not miserable. Not just getting by. Actually, happy. And Kelly? She was just a story I used to tell. Rachel had always been good at talking her way out of things. Twisting words, bending reality, making herself the victim even when the evidence was stacked against her. But this time she had nothing. The divorce papers sat on the kitchen counter, untouched, the weight of them pressing into the space between us like a loaded gun. I watched her from across the room as she stared down at them, her fingers trembling at the edges of the pages. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice raw. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. "You think there's another option?" Her eyes snapped up to mine, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Desperation, fear, maybe even regret. "We could go to therapy. We can fix this." I let out a humorless laugh. "Fix what?" "Rachel, you weren't just cheating. You were living in this affair. Lying every day, covering your tracks, looking me in the eye and telling me you loved me while you were sneaking off to hotels with him." Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. That instinct, the one that had always told me to make things better, to keep the peace, was gone. Burned out. She took a slow step forward. "It wasn't like that." I scoffed. "Then explain it to me, Rachel. How was it?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I nodded. "Exactly." She was scrambling now, trying to piece together a way out, try to rebuild a bridge that had already burned to ash. "I was stupid," she finally said, her voice shaking. "I got caught up in something I didn't mean to. It was never about you, Tom. It was never about us." I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "Are you hearing yourself? It was about us. It was about every single time you came home and lied to my face. Every excuse. Every locked phone. Every moment I spent wondering what the hell I did wrong." She flinched like I had slapped her. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "Because you did." She let out a shaky breath, running her hands through her hair. "Tom, I don't want to lose you." "You already did," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Silence stretched between us. She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was finally realizing this wasn't a fight she could win. I wasn't budging. There was no fixing this. Then the shift happened. The moment when the tears dried up and the regret turned into something else. Anger. Her jaw tightened. "So that's it?" she snapped. "You're just walking away? After everything?" I raised an eyebrow. "After everything? You mean after you blew up our marriage?" She scoffed, shaking her head. "You act like you're so perfect, like you never did anything wrong." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, trust me, Rachel, I made a mistake. I trusted you." Her nostrils flared. You're really going to throw our whole life away over one mistake. One, I repeated, stepping closer. How many times, Rachel? How many mistakes did you make? Was it just Chicago? Or were there more? She pressed her lips together, refusing to answer. I nodded, my chest tightening. That's what I thought. Her eyes darkened. And what about you? I frowned. What about me? She crossed her arms. You followed me. You spied on me. You set me up. How is that any better than what I did? I blinked, then let out a sharp laugh. Are you serious? You're actually trying to make me the bad guy. She didn't say anything, just held my gaze like she thought she could make me crack. I shook my head. You cheated. I caught you. That's the story. Her shoulders rose and fell with a deep, angry breath. Fina, you want a divorce? You got it. But don't think for a second that I'm just going to roll over and let you take everything. I smiled. She had no idea how far ahead I was. I turned, walked to the counter, and picked up the folder sitting next to the divorce papers. I handed it to her. What is this? She asked, suspicious. Financial records, I said simply. She hesitated, then opened it. Her face paled as she scanned the pages. I watched her throat tighten. What is this? Proof, I said, leaning against the counter. Proof that while you were off playing house with your pilot, I was preparing. Bank records, assets, legal documents. I've been untangling our finances for months, Rachel. The house? In my name. The savings? Locked. The investments? Transferred. You get nothing. She looked up at me, her mouth slightly open. I warned you. I cut in. The second I knew what you were doing, I stopped being the guy you could manipulate. She threw the folder onto the counter with a slap. You're a what? I asked, tilting my head. A liar? A cheater? A fraud? That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Her eyes burned into mine, but she knew. She knew she had lost. I stepped back, nodding toward the divorce papers. Sign them. Her jaw clenched. And if I don't? I shrugged. Then we take it to court. And trust me, after the evidence I have, no judge is going to side with you. But if you sign now, I walk away quietly. She swallowed hard, glancing at the papers. I could see the war inside her. Pride versus survival. Anger versus damage control. Then, slowly, she reached for the pen. My heart pounded as she signed her name, each letter dragging across the paper like a final nail in the coffin. When she was done, she dropped the pen and shoved the papers toward me. There, she spat. Happy. I picked them up, glanced at her signature, then folded them neatly. For the first time in a long time, I said, sliding them into my bag. Rachel stood there, seething, her face twisted with frustration, regret, and something else, defeat. I grabbed my keys and turned for the door. Where are you going? She demanded. I looked over my shoulder one last time. Anywhere but here. And then I walked out, leaving her to face the wreckage of her own choices. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.